We do begin with the breaking news that a Pakistani citizen living in Toronto has been arrested, accused of planning a mass shooting at a Jewish center in Brooklyn, New York. Authorities say the goal was to kill Jewish people in the name of ISIS around October 7th. Of course, that's the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel. Mohammed Shazeb Khan was arrested 2 days ago south of Montreal. He is charged in the U.S. with attempting to provide material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization. He could face 20 years if convicted. The RCMP commissioner says his planned anti-Semitic attack against Jewish people in the U.S. is deplorable, and there is no such place for this kind of ideology and hate-motivated crime in Canada. Let's go to Ward Elcock. He's a former CSIS director, and he joins us now to talk some more about this. Ward, this would obviously take a lot of cooperation between the U.S. and Canada, but why make the arrest in Canada instead of the U.S.?
I suspect that was probably simply so that he would be prosecuted in the U.S. rather than in Canada. But that's who knows what the purpose of that was.
Okay, so are we seeing more cases? Are we hearing about more cases where people are trying to sneak, well, cross the border from Canada into the U.S. to carry out terrorist attacks?
No, I don't think we are. I mean, the reality is this has always been an issue for Canada. The reality is we are on the northern border of the United States, and the reality is the Americans expect us to contribute to the protection of their northern border. If we don't, the consequences could be severe. Some people may remember that during 9/11, the border shut down, not because it was physically shut down, but because there was the enormous pressure on the border. The reality is if the Americans don't believe that we are protecting our northern border and their northern border and protecting them from terrorism, there are consequences to that. In this case, obviously, there was sufficient sharing, and the reality is the individual was apprehended in the United States and will be prosecuted there, I assume.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens next, because my understanding he was arrested 2 days ago south of Montreal. Would they have already sent him to the U.S., or do you think there would have been an appearance here and then he would have been sent?
Well, if he was arrested in Canada, sorry, I thought he'd been arrested in the United States. Okay. If he was arrested in Canada, he will be prosecuted in Canada for terrorism charges, and that will take some time, but it will run through the course.
Okay, so now it begins the court process, which, as you said, could be a long time. It sounds like this was one of those cases where they see online activity that they track, and perhaps that leads to an arrest. Is that the way it reads to you?
Yes, it is fairly normal. The reality is the ability to track such activity is considerable, and fortunately, most of the folks who are involved in that kind of activity drift to the top and are targeted well before they carry out an attack. The reality is the last thing you want is an actual attack, because the consequences of that are enormous.
We hear of, I presume, the odd case. Are there other cases that just never make public radar?
No, I don't think you could assume that. The reality is most cases that are going to make the radar are real cases. Most cases that are not real are not real. There may be people who aspire to do things who never actually do them. The reality is those who do aspire to do them usually drift to the top and usually are apprehended before they carry something out. The real fear, frankly, and the real concern is that an attack could actually take place that we missed. It's kind of back to the 9/11 situation where a lot of Americans thought that the attackers of 9/11 came from Canada. It took a long time to dispel that reality. They weren't from Canada. They all were from the United States, but a lot of Americans still believe that the attackers in 9/11 came from Canada.
So, Ward, I know a lot of people say a lot of things online. I'm just wondering what makes it real. At what point is it actionable for Canadian or American law enforcement?
That's a question of judgment, and the reality is that's hard. It isn't easy to do. There are lots of people who who will say things that they never intend to carry out. And some of those people may wind up in more trouble than they imagine simply because they imagine something. The real problem is distinguishing between those who are just fair weather terrorists and those who are real terrorists. And that's a tough job sometimes.
Is that line crossed when they start sort of gathering elements, weapons, perhaps
Yes,
to commit a crime? Is that sort of the actionable part then?
that certainly is. That certainly becomes actionable when they start to look like they're preparing an actual attack.
Yeah.
To actually, it may also, the fact that you even speculate about it may cause the law enforcement to react to you. But the reality is, once you start to assemble tools, once you start to assemble people, once you start to assemble targets, once you start to enumerate the kinds of things you intend to do, then you're over the line and you're almost certainly going to be picked up quickly.
Got it. Ward Elcock, good to have you, sir. Thanks for your time today.
A pleasure.